We reported earlier on last night's missile launch by Houthi rebels in Yemen that targeted the Saudi capital, Riyadh. The attack coincided with today's third bloody anniversary of Saudi Arabia's involvement in Yemen's civil war. Sreenivasan recently spoke with a journalist who has reported for years on Yemen, its many conflicts, and the people caught in between.
Thousands of civilians have died and more than 3 million have been displaced in the war between a U.S.-backed Saudi coalition and Houthi rebels. Yemen was also the scene of the first commando raid directly ordered by President Trump. That 2017 raid ended in the death of a U.S. Navy SEAL and Yemeni civilians. Iona Clark is a freelance journalist who's just won a Polk Award for her investigation of this raid. She has deep experience reporting in Yemen. Thanks for joining us. First, tell us, you've lived there for 5 years. You've been on multiple reporting trips. How has Yemen changed in the country that you first started reporting in and now through the civil war?
It's actually a really very depressing place to go back to now, and I've got a lot of friends that have been immediately affected by both the conflict and the humanitarian crisis. And Yemenis are very resilient. That's something I found from the beginning of my time there. Yeah. But that resilience has been worn down now gradually. Every time I go back, I see more and more people just really struggling to live day to day.
You know, some of the struggle numbers that we hear about: 22.2 million Yemenis that need humanitarian assistance, 1.8 million children under the age of 5 that are acutely malnourished, more than 1 million cases of cholera, at least 10,000 civilians killed. What does that do to a society, an economy? How do people function?
Whether it's in the north, where the Houthi rebels now control Sana'a, or if it's in the territory controlled by the Saudi-led coalition in this conflict, the children on both sides are suffering. And to sit and speak to women as their children are literally dying of starvation in their arms is really, really not only tragic, but hard to get your kind of head around, and to see that repeatedly in the hundreds and thousands going across the country, and to see people just so helpless, not able to get to medical care because they can't afford it, not even being able to buy the food that is there and available in the markets because they haven't got the money to do so.
You know, we've heard recently about the difficulty of trying to get humanitarian aid in there, but I think it's also important to clarify the role that the West, the U.S. and the U.K. are playing in this fight, though not directly.
Exactly. Well, the U.S. main involvement in supporting the Saudi-led coalition in this is helping them, assisting them really in the air war. And certainly according to UN figures, the majority of casualties in the conflict have been caused by the Saudi-led coalition airstrikes. And the US involvement in that is they're doing mid-air refueling. So they're refueling the fighter jets that are carrying out these bombing raids and bombing runs, particularly in northern Yemen now and through the center of the country, as well as providing intelligence and targeting assistance, of course. And that's really crucial because much of the civilian infrastructure has been hit in addition to the high number of civilian casualties. So water supply lines, for example, hospitals have been hit, schools have been hit, farms have been targeted, and that all comes with the US involvement. And in addition to that, the fishermen on the Red Sea coast have also been targeted. More than 250 boats of fishermen have been either destroyed or damaged, and more than 152 fishermen have been killed as well.
You know, the Saudis are going to say, listen, this is the Houthis' fault. Anybody in a war will say it's the other person's fault. They're saying at least 100 rockets have been launched inside the kingdom that we're primarily trying to defend ourselves. What is Mohammed bin Salman, the new crown prince's, stake in this? Just recently, he fired a bunch of his chief of staff of all of his army in taking over. Is this a fairly crucial part of Saudi foreign policy?
It became so. Before he was Crown Prince, he was also the Minister of Defense when this war started. So he really led this war and the Saudi involvement in it. But of course, their reason for becoming involved in the first place is because they've seen the Houthis as a proxy for Iran. Which is very much a sort of state of paranoia, if you like, of the Saudis. There is political alignment between the Houthis and Iran, and it has in some way become self-fulfilling. There has been some Iranian involvement in certainly doing small amounts of training of Houthi fighters, but it's not at the scale you'll see in Syria and elsewhere in the region, and it's certainly not at the level of the Houthis being a proxy for Iran or answering to Iran.
Going back to that raid in early 2017, the White House called it highly successful. The military commanders came out and said that they gathered lots of important intelligence. You were really the only reporter that was actually able to go to these villages and verify what had happened on the ground. That really changed our understanding of the entire situation. That's what the Polk Award was for. But tell us what kind of update that story. What's happened since then?
Well, the area of Al-Baida, which is the name of the governorate or the governorate or the province where it happened, has been repeatedly targeted since then. This is an area that's right on the front lines of where the tribesmen are fighting against the Houthis, and where there has been an al-Qaeda presence who have been fighting on the side of the Saudi-led coalition that the US is supporting. So really, for the people in that area, the story did not end when I left that village and did that story. It's really continued, and I've kept in contact with them actually quite regularly. Many of those families were displaced from that area because of the repeated airstrikes. They couldn't go back to their homes. Many of them were living in tents on the side of the mountain for many months because of the risk of being killed in their own homes after that raid. And so Al-Baida has been really really at the heart of a lot of the US airstrikes that have been carried out, drone strikes as well, over the last year and over a year now, and the first year of the Trump administration. That has been one area that they've specifically targeted repeatedly.
All right, Iona Clark, thank you so much for your reporting, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.